The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
As we think about the 2018 and the 2020 elections, a really relevant question is whether Democrats will be able to take advantage of the disaster sort of known to us as Donald Trump and do well in the 2018 midterms and ultimately in the 2020 election. And we don't really know, right? I mean, at the national level, the special elections have not gone particularly well for Democrats since November of 2016. But there is one statistic that maybe points to the anti-Republican undertone of the last 6 months. At the state level in 2017 so far, Democrats have taken 7 seats from Republicans, while Republicans, on the other hand, have not taken any state legislative seats from Democrats. And most recently, earlier this week, Tuesday night, Democrats flipped 2 more Republican-held seats. One is in New Hampshire, one in Oklahoma, and those were big Trump districts back in November. And there's another interesting number, which is that out of 35 races at the state and congressional level, the Democratic candidate has done better than Hillary Clinton in the same districts in November in 26 of those. In 26 of 35 of these races, the Democratic candidate got more support on a percentage basis, lower turnout, but on a percentage basis than Hillary Clinton in November. Now, they still lost in some of those districts, right? So they might have outperformed Hillary Clinton's November performance, but still ultimately lost to a Republican. But that's okay, right? We're looking at trends. And a legitimate question is, how much do state level races correlate with what is or might happen at the national level next November or 2 years after that? It's not really clear, but still, these are interesting indicators to look at. Another one is that Republicans have quite a few resigning and retiring seats, resigning and retiring politicians, I guess we would call it, leaving open House seats for 2018. That number is climbing significantly as we close in on the 2018 midterms, which are just over a year away, incredibly. So a few things. Number one, midterms generally are good for the party not in control of the White House, right? That's a historically underlying systemic thing. So that already sort of says to us, well, Democrats should do well in 2018. Now, aside from that, there's the specifics of the Trump effect. And I've said it before and I will say it again. This should be a gimme. This should be a gimme in 2018 and in 2020. But the 2016 presidential election also should have been a gimme. And the Democrats managed to royally screw it up at multiple levels. Please don't mess this up. Build an actual progressive platform. Figure out the best way to focus resources. Is it primarying Democrats or is it trying to take Republican seats? And by the way, please fight as underdogs. Do not fight 2018 and 2020 as entitled candidates that should obviously win because of Trump. You've got to be right on the issues as well. Democrats need to get way more progressive when it comes to their public platform. I've talked about Medicare-for-All. We've got Bernie plus 12 co-sponsors plus some other supporters or whatever the numbers are. There is no reason that Republicans should control the White House and the House and the Senate and still fail to take out Obamacare. That signals weakness, Pat, particularly on the issues. We know that when Americans are fairly polled, they are way to the left of the elected officials that represent us. Right. And yet, stuff like it's a government socialist takeover of healthcare, that type of garbage still works. And I'm begging and pleading with Democrats, don't screw this up in 2018.
There definitely are some signs of hope on the state level, but if you look at the federal level, since Trump won the election, it hasn't really been so hopeful because there were 4 members who were former congressmen who went to Trump's cabinet, Tom Price, Mick Mulvaney, Ryan Zinke, and Mike Pompeo. And even though they were in conservative seats, you'd think that the Democratic challenger would have some chance, I mean, given that Trump was so unpopular. Yeah. And yet they all lost. I mean, one of the Republican contenders, Greg Gianforte, body slammed a reporter, and he still managed to pull it off.
A couple thoughts on that. Yeah, you're right. They did lose. The Democratic challengers were overperforming Hillary Clinton in most of those races, which is still part of the trend. They are really, really red districts. And also, Trump was not nearly as unpopular when those took place as he is now. So I still think that there is hope here. But yeah, you're right. As I mentioned at the beginning of the story, at the federal level, some of these special elections have not gone particularly well. I think that the major primary issue is turnout, right? That's the opportunity. Take some progressive positions, grow a backbone, and say, we're actually going to be a left-wing party. Of course, a lot of the Democrats aren't actually left-wing, so that'll probably be a stumbling block, but let's pretend for a second that they do that. Half the country didn't vote in the presidential election. In midterms, turnout is usually even lower. From a mathematical standpoint, what that means is every person who is unregistered that you can get to come out and vote has even more of a potential impact than in a presidential election. The lower the turnout is, the more each additional vote matters. And Democrats need to be focused on voter turnout. They need to be appealing to the unregistered voters in red states who would vote for Democrats if they thought Democrats had a chance, who would vote at all if they thought that there was actually a difference between the Democrat and the Republican. On many issues, there is no difference. On many important issues, there is a difference. And if they thought that it would make a difference, then they would actually come out and vote. I sound like I'm totally desperate here, and it's because I am. I mean, 2016 was a pathetic embarrassment, and I'm increasingly worried the exact same thing is going to happen in 2018.
It does have to do with ground game, and that starts with the DNC. I mean, you take a look at the most recent election, Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote by 3 million, but she didn't put her assets in the right places to win the states that she needed.
Yep.
And then oftentimes, how many times have we seen it that the Democrats overall in the country got the majority of votes when it comes to the House and Senate seats, but because of the ways districts have been gerrymandered and just because of how states are divided up, they lost seats overall.
It's happened time and again, and I think the assets in the right place thing is relevant also when we think about, and this is a serious question to be asking, given the circumstances, right? I am not saying it's not ever worth primarying conservative Democrats. Given the circumstances of the situation today and under Trump, does it make sense to focus limited 2018 resources on primarying Democrats, or does it make more sense to focus on taking Republican seats? Think about it, Democrats. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Tell me what you think about all this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Mr. R.D. Jones. Mr. R.D. Jones, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Join R.D. at davidpakman.com/membership. You can also get access to some of the great member benefits at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Okay, let's get to calls because the lines are absolutely on fire. I mean, just shocking what's going on with our phone lines right now. 617-830-4750 is the number. We'll start with our first caller from the 801 area code. Caller from 801, what's your name, where are you calling from, and what's on your mind?
Hey, this is Branson. I'm from Salt Lake, Utah. I'm a big fan of the show,
Thank you.
First of all.
Thank you. What's on your mind today?
Well, I'm studying economics at university right now, if I understand right. I think you said you were also an economics student. That's where your degree was in.
Yes, I have an undergraduate degree in economics, and my MBA concentration was economics.
Oh, great. So I was just wondering maybe why... Normally in economics, we make arguments on efficiency. And I was just wondering how you kind of justified your view on the $15 an hour minimum wage.
Well, you're going to have to say more in terms of in what way would a $15 minimum wage not be efficient?
Well, I was just thinking in it's essentially a doubling of the minimum wage. So, I mean, in most areas, especially just for example, in rural Utah, it just seems like a big change.
Yeah. And so in what way would it not be efficient?
Well, I mean, if you raise the cost of wages, I guess the argument would be that people would just hire people for less hours.
Fewer hours, right. Yeah, I mean, so in the places where that's been explored, it doesn't tend to happen. If we, we can talk about efficiency. The thing is, what you would expect to also see if you increase the minimum wage to $15, and this is an argument where if the counter is, well, then why not raise it to 200? You have to understand $200 an hour wouldn't be an equilibrium wage. If you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, number one, that would reduce poverty. It would get some people out of poverty. And thus, we could argue that by having a smaller population in poverty, that adds to economic efficiency because fewer people require social programs which have significant inefficiencies in terms of means testing and bureaucracy. If you imagine someone who, by virtue of getting out of poverty, just gets a bigger, by virtue of having a larger minimum wage, gets a higher minimum wage, gets a bigger paycheck from their employer, it does not change anything about the efficiency of them receiving that wage. They just get a bigger check from their employer. But all of a sudden, you reduce the workload for somebody who previously might have been involved in administering or approving welfare benefits for that person, for example. So people earning more money through wages rather than through social welfare programs, I would argue, is significantly more efficient.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, I thought so.
Would you also kind of make a Keynesian argument here?
I'm sorry, what kind of argument?
Keynesian, like Keynesian economics, like redistribution.
Oh, Keynesian. I see. No, listen, I'm not. I've studied Keynesian economics. I'm not the guy who's going to go around making the Keynesian arguments. So I think that there's many shows that would. Okay, Branson, appreciate the call. Thank you very much. Always good to get economics questions. Sometimes people get a little nervous when they call. That's okay.
It happens.
That's okay. It happens to everybody. Let's go to our next caller from the 717 area code. Caller from 717, can you hear me? What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hi, my name is Zach from Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Great. What's on your mind, Zach?
Well, I think it was last week, Ta-Nehisi Coates came out with a really good article called Donald Trump, the First White President. And I was wondering if you had read that and how do you feel about the conclusions he draws from it?
I did not read it. What conclusions are drawn?
That Donald Trump is the first president to be elected by running on being white. You know, he ran on every policy that Obama had. We have to go against it. He sort of galvanized his followers to, I don't know, I can't find the words.
I think I get what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple issues there. One is, yes, Trump has run and has legislated significantly on the idea of Obama did it, oh, well, then let's undo it. Now, just because Obama was black, that doesn't necessarily mean that any opposition to Obama policies by Trump is sort of running on or to white people or on whiteness necessarily being the key word. But nobody can deny that you have seen white identity movements, and we could list them. I won't, but you know what many of them are. Donald Trump has sort of coalesced, activated, and galvanized white identity movements in a way that presidential candidates haven't for a very, very long time. Now, the first white president, there was a time when the idea of a non-white president was laughable. And really the idea of even needing to appeal to anybody but white people was also sort of unnecessary in American politics. So I think in the modern era, maybe there's an argument to be made, but for a long time, presidential elections were by and for white people. So I don't know. I'd have to read the article, but it sounds interesting.
It's very good. He actually starts from the beginning of America, if you want to call it that. But he talks about how the servant class in the early beginnings of America would argue that they would never like to be called servants, or they would never like to be called these sorts of diminutive terms, because they always looked at there being one class below them. And I definitely suggest this article for the audience. It's a very long read. I think it's going to be part of his new book, but very good. It's in the Atlantic.
Very good. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate the call, Zach. Always great to hear from you. Let's go back to the phones and go to 617-830-4750. That's the number you call. We'll go to the next caller from the 973 area code. Caller from 973, tell us who you are, where you're calling from, and what can I answer for you today?
Hi, this is Jay from New Jersey.
Great. What's on your mind?
I'm calling in regards to the Bernie Sanders single-payer bill.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, do you believe that this issue is becoming like a non-negotiable, and that the Democratic Party as a whole will?
Jay, I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time hearing you. Let's take the question from the top, and let's turn Jay up as much as we can, and speak up, please, Jay.
I'm sorry. Do you believe that Bernie Sanders' single-payer bill will become a non-negotiable for the Democratic Party, and that they will actually try to implement this, or do you believe that corporate Democrats are just paying lip service to progressives at a time where they know that this bill can't actually get passed right now?
So two thoughts on this. Number one is the question of whether the bill will ultimately become law is a different one from whether corporate Democrats will be what gets in the way, right? I mean, corporate Democrats might not get in the way, and it might still not become law because Democrats control nothing right now. They don't control the White House, they don't control the House, they don't control the Senate. So as I mentioned earlier in the week, I do think that it's an easy thing for Democrats in blue states to co-sponsor because public opinion is as in favor of this as they've been in the modern political era of polling. You have no risk of actually having to figure out the details before your next reelection campaign, certainly in the House and in the Senate, it depends, because Republicans control everything right now. So I do believe that it's a sort of gimme for a lot of Democrats. And yet at the same time, I think it's really important because, and it sounds almost naive, but I do believe that it is important, that there is this on-record support, unprecedented support from elected officials on the Democratic side for co-sponsoring such a bill, more support than we've ever seen before. Okay, so that's number one, and whether it's pandering or not or whatever, I think it's important no matter what, but it is a very easy decision for a lot of people. Corporate Democrats may well, if it has a chance to happen, and that's not going to be before the midterms for sure, and probably not before 2020, corporate Democrats might get in the way. We talk about many areas where Democrats and Republicans are the same, and we talk about many areas where Democrats and Republicans are very different. Both Democrats and Republicans, by and large, get a lot of money from the health insurance industry. This is a proposal which would be really bad for the health insurance industry. So I think you're thinking about the dynamics of money in politics the exact right way. Yeah, corporate Democrats could get in the way of this if it ever has an actual chance of passing.
Wait, one more quick point.
Yeah.
Do you believe that if they say they take back the House and the Senate in, say, 2018, that the political momentum of this bill could, make the whole party, as a whole, adopt this as a non-negotiable issue, or do you believe that that the Democrats still will get in the way?
I've been advocating for a while. I've been advocating for a while, Jay, that the Democratic Party officially make this a part of their platform. And you know what? That doesn't mean that even if they say this is our platform and it's non-negotiable, that doesn't guarantee that it's going to become law if Democrats take power. We've seen how that works in the past. We've seen a lot of those types of statements backfire under the Trump administration. So I do believe that Democrats should officially make Medicare-for-All, healthcare-for-all, single-payer part of their platform. I believe that they will not, and I do believe that the more moderate and corporate influences in the Democratic Party would be part of that. Jay, thank you. I appreciate the call. I do have to move on. We are taking calls at 617-830-4750. We're going to go to our next caller from the 315 area code. Caller from 315, welcome. What's your name? Where are you calling from? And what's your question today?
Hi, guys. My name is Jay. I'm calling from upstate New York.
All right. What's on your mind?
I'd like to read you a little statistic from Huffington Post and wondering if I can get your thoughts on this. It has to do with the Supreme Court's temporary lift on Trump's travel ban.
Right.
Shortly after Tuesday's Supreme Court ruling, the New York Times reported that the administration is also considering slashing the annual refugee settlement cap to below 50,000, the lowest it would be since 1980. When Barack Obama was in office, he raised it to 110,000 from 70,000. Now, my question is, what do you think this accomplishes other than the racists in charge keeping brown people out of the United States?
Well, it accomplishes the thinly veiled notion of keeping us safe, right? Because this is that's the undertone. Even though the white nationalists and the racists have been very clear that they're understanding Donald Trump's coded language incredibly clearly, there's still been this sort of faux, I don't know, call it like a costume or a cloaking of sorts, that this is all because we're a country of law and order and we're going to be safe and we're going to be orderly and everybody's going to go out and then they're going to come back in through the big, beautiful door or whatever the case may be. But of course, the white nationalists, they get it loud and clear. So I completely agree with you that in practice, it accomplishes very little other than just perpetuating the sort of white supremacist undertones of the Trump administration. But it does, at least on paper, allow Trump to claim that he's doing some of what he promised to do during the campaign. But it's ridiculous. I mean, clearly you see through it, Jay, it sounds like.
Yeah, under the veil of security, I guess you're right, it does look good on paper, but this is such a red flag of racism to me.
Of course.
It should scream to a higher level of the media to me.
Yeah, it should, but, you know, there are so many constant scandals and atrocities being said that individually, a lot of stuff that should be major breaking news just barely makes a blip in the media radar because we're constantly hearing about so much. But you're absolutely right, and it's all part of the same thing. And of course, where is the evidence that refugees in the United States are this grave risk and committers of crime, right? I mean, we don't have that evidence. That's what is often forgotten in this.
Exactly. I agree.
All right, Jay, thanks for the call. Really appreciate it. And on that note, we will take a break. 617-830-4750 is the number. We will take more calls right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Welcome back to the show. Let's get back to the phones. A lot of people on the phones at 617-830-4750. Let's go instead to 732. Caller from 732. Can you hear me? And what's on your mind today?
Hey, yeah, I can hear you.
All right. Who's this?
So, this is Kyle from Philly. How's it going?
Good, Kyle. Go ahead.
Hey, so I think that there's been a big overreach or overlook on this whole free speech on campus debate that has been going on in what seems to be the news media for a few years now. And I'm kind of sick of people like Bill Maher complaining that him not getting paid $25,000, whatever his speaking engagement fee is a violation of free speech or a betrayal of the so-called values of free speech that UC Berkeley has. And he's complained about it on his show. Tucker Carlson complains about it, Milo Yiannopoulos. And I'm just sick of hearing these, paid speakers who are basically being deplatformed by students who are paying for these people to come to their campus and out of their tuition money.
Yeah.
If you really value free speech, why aren't you going there without getting paid? Why don't you just go and go for free. If you really value it, instead of valuing your, livelihood or how you make money, and it's okay that they, get paid money by schools to do speeches, but, when you have a college system that's set up where the students are paying, hundreds of thousands of dollars in tuition fees to attend these colleges, they kind of have a right to, say, I don't want my tuition money going toward this paid speaker.
Yeah, there's a few issues here. There's a few different issues here. And, I do paid speaking at colleges. I get paid a lot less than Bill Maher. That, folks, I can assure you. Believe me, I'm getting paid less than Bill Maher. But putting that aside for a second, if a school doesn't want to have me, and it's very common that schools don't want to have me, right? At most schools, I don't speak because I'm not invited. There's no inherent right to be allowed to speak formally, like at a planned and scheduled event. Like I could show up on campus and just talk in the public area, but nobody would listen to me necessarily. That's not a violation of free speech, putting aside for a fact that when we're talking about violations of free speech and the First Amendment, we're talking about government. If you're talking about state schools, it is a form of government. But putting that aside for a second, you don't have any right to go and speak at whatever school you want to. You still have to be invited. And number two, the fact that you are speaking does not mean that you have to be paid, first of all. And further, it doesn't mean that there can't be consequences to that. And I believe that as long as you are not physically endangering the speaker, if you want to protest that someone is coming to the school because you disagree with their ideas, right? You want to activate against their ideas. What's wrong with that, right? I do disagree with criminality and causing chaos because you believe someone should be deplatformed. I think that there are other ways to prevent people from speaking. Sometimes they don't work, right? But saying, hey, I don't want my tuition money to be used to pay the speaker and activating in that way is totally valid. But I think that there's such an upside down understanding, Kyle, of so many aspects of this from both the speakers and the students who want some of these speakers to show up and the students who don't want the speakers to show up, that it's really become quite a mess. And we did a really interesting interview, actually, with an expert on the First Amendment, and he cleared up a lot of the misconceptions that are often used when people argue about this.
Yeah, I agree with every word you just said there,
Wow.
And I'm glad that, people are hopefully starting to understand that, it is a job to be a paid speaker or to be paid at a speaking engagement, for whatever amount of money. That's not necessarily free speech. You have a right to say what you want, but a college that is paying you has a right, as either you're a contractor or you kind of have the designation of an at-will employee, being a paid speaker, is that, you can get let go as easily as I can get let go from my position for, saying something in the workplace.
Yep.
And
I've always been 1099'd as a contractor whenever I've spoken at colleges and been paid. And that just means that they're saying, hey, we're inviting you to do this specific thing. They can fire you at any time. They can, right? I mean, it's just that's just the way it works.
Exactly. That's got to be a mess during April dealing with all those 1099s, David.
Yep. No doubt about it. Okay. Thanks very much for the call. Appreciate it, Kyle. Good to hear from you. Let's stick to the phones. We'll go next to our caller from the 786 area code. Caller from 786. What's your name? Where are you calling from? And what's on your mind today?
Hello, David. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah. Speak up, though. You're a little low. And tell us your name, too.
Hi. My name's Danny from Miami, Florida.
Great. Hey, by the way, how are things in Miami? What with the hurricane? I'm sort of tentatively supposed to be down in Miami in December. And are things okay?
Things are pretty flooded. I mean, my neighborhood got pretty nicely rattled by the hurricane. A couple trees down, a tree fell on my neighbor's car. So not great.
Power's on though?
What was that?
Power is on?
Power's on. Data service is still not back up. I'm calling through Wi-Fi right now.
Okay, got it. All right, what's on your mind?
So I wanted to ask you, with sort of the rise of the far right through the Western hemisphere, I guess you can say.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is the best way for the left to sort of curtail that and kind of, I guess you could say, regain the reins? Should we debate them, punch them? What do you,
Yeah,
what do you
so
think is the?
I don't
the
think
best
that we should punch. I do think that it makes sense. It's always tough when you ask, well, what's the best way to fight back against a particular set of ideas? Because number one, it's not always, there's not one method that is the best for everybody, right? So depending on one's position sort of within society and their level of knowledge and comfort and where you work, where you live, etc., there are different ways that individuals can activate against movements that they find to be despicable, vile, and disgusting, which many of these movements certainly qualify as. So number one, I think that any time that the opponents to these far-right movements turn to violence or aggression, they are hurting themselves. Now, you can make a moral case, right? There are people who say, no, you can morally make the case that Nazis deserve to be punched. Let's not even debate that. Let's just agree, or at least realize, that if you do that, you are going to delegitimize or appear to delegitimize your side of the debate, and it really shouldn't be much of a debate. So you don't want to concede anything by being the side that goes first to physical violence. That's number one. Number two, debating. Debating is a complex thing because there are debates that merely by virtue of agreeing to have a debate, you are to some degree legitimizing what you are debating against. In other words, if an idea really is so silly that it's not worthy of being debated against, that means to many people that it's not that worthwhile to even consider. If there are all of a sudden prominent debates with white supremacists or extreme rightists or whatever, in a sense, it might appear as though that legitimizes their points of view. That's not always the case, though. If you have people in media, and we do opposition debates with some frequency, and the context clearly is, like when I interview a white supremacist, the context is obviously, I don't agree with them. And I'm coming in prepared to sort of expose the weaknesses in the arguments, then I think that there is some benefit to that. But as you can probably hear me saying, Danny, there's no one-size-fits-all response. And I know that there have been a few prominent articles that say, you know, one view is ignore the far-rightists and all of the events that they throw, just completely ignore it. And then there are others who say, terrible idea. Do not ignore them because that's how they slowly will gain more and more support, and before you know it, these are movements that will have some power. So unfortunately, I don't think there's one answer as to what to do, but I think it's really important not to be sort of goaded or suckered into acting in ways that are going to be perceived as delegitimizing the opposition movement. That's a really bad idea.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. I just, you know, I've read up on some interesting articles that talk about the absurdity of fascism, basically this this sort of unadherence to having an honest debate. It's more about, you know, presenting a strongman message, and it's a very hard idea to argue against because you're coming to the table with, you know, facts, evidence, whatever you're trying to do to sway the I guess you could say centrist, and then here comes someone who's touting a different, utilizing rhetoric to essentially bring people to their side. And so
that's the other thing. Like, debates can also be.
Debate is a.
Sometimes we think that if we just hit people over the head with facts, then clearly they'll see that our facts are right. But as we've seen with climate change and climate science, it doesn't really work that way. So that can be dangerous. Not dangerous in any kind of sense beyond just it can backfire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, Danny,
well,
thanks so much for the call.
Very
much appreciate it. Great to hear from you. Let's go next to our caller from the 412 area code. I think 412 is Pittsburgh, if I recall correctly. Caller in 412, can you hear me? What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Yes, my name is Brian. I am from Pittsburgh.
Great. What's on your mind?
And, well, I wanted to ask you, Dave, what do you think of the concept of antinatalism?
I'm sorry, antinatalism?
Correct.
In terms of opposing birthing to reduce the birth rate?
That's correct.
Okay, well, talk a little bit more about it. How would an antinatalist, on what grounds would an antinatalist argue?
Well, for one, I mean, if we look at the state of the world as it is today, I mean, is it really feasible to bring more children into this world and force them to endure what I would call excruciating suffering due to, you look at the class 3 gun firing off with the melting of the permafrost, or you look at the depletion of resources. It can only go downhill from here.
Yeah. Listen, I think that there's a couple different thoughts on that. And I've actually thought about this quite a bit, just in terms of, like, if I wanted to have a kid someday, would I feel okay saying, here's the world we have. I'm going to choose to bring a new person into it, given all of the terrible things that go on. If you have a fundamentally, to me, this sort of comes down to your long-term view on the future of Homo sapiens, right? If your view is that if we are thoughtful and we make changes, that most of the changes we already sort of know what they have to be with regard to energy consumption and resource usage and pollution and whatnot. If you believe that the project of Homo sapiens is a worthwhile project, then I think that the thoughtful bringing of new people onto the planet makes sense. Now, do I support having 6, 7, 8 kids like many in religious communities do? Certainly in Hasidic Judaism and in other sects of Christianity, I don't support that. But I believe that if you're bullish long term on Homo sapiens, and it's hard to be when you see, Trump's president, after all, right? How could we really be that bullish on the future of Homo sapiens? But if you are, I think that the thoughtful rearing of children does make sense. So I don't call myself an antinatalist, but I totally respect people who say, you know what? I don't feel good about bringing children into the world that we have now, and so I'm going to choose not to. I respect that. I'm not there yet.
I mean, that's understandable, but aren't you clinging to a more sort of optimism bias in which you kind of say to yourself, well, there's a chance, but it seems like with each passing year, the chance to make the world more livable, habitable, and manageable slips away.
Yeah, it might appear that way, but remember, we are only observing a very, very small slice of changes. So even what we're seeing from year to year, as I agree with you, it's devastating what we're doing to the planet. I don't find that I would be in a position to really have the 30,000-foot view on that to say, you know what, no more children for anybody, because we're clearly not going to be able to, figure out what we're doing to the climate, move to other planets, whatever. I'm just not there yet. And normally my bias is to pessimism, actually. After all, I was born to a Jewish family. So pessimism comes pretty naturally, but and neuroticism. But I still somehow have somewhat of an optimism on that. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks so much for the call, Brian. Appreciate it. Very, very interesting and depressing topic, I might say. And on that note, let's take a break. I'm kind of bummed out after that last call, and we'll do a few audience questions next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
All right, let's dig into audience questions. First one is from Ken. Hey, David, like you, I switch between glasses and contact lenses. However, I've been increasingly considering going the LASIK route. Have you ever thought about undergoing LASIK surgery? If so, what has kept you from taking the leap? Yeah, I have, I'm nearsighted, and I wear contact lenses most of the time, wear glasses sometimes on the weekends or at night or whenever I don't feel like wearing my contacts. I don't have like super serious nearsightedness, so I think I'm like a minus 2.75 or something like that. And I have thought about getting LASIK. For me, it's basically, the eye doctor typically says you shouldn't do it until the progression of your nearsightedness has stopped. And I think that means 2 years with no change, I believe. And I usually have like a 0.25 change every time.
Because then you may have to do it again?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess you want it to stabilize. But the thing is, I believe, and I don't know exactly how this works, I have quite a few friends who are optometrists. I should ask them. When you start to get older, the nearsightedness can improve as you develop a need for not farsightedness, but something that would cause the need for reading glasses. I don't remember. But anyway, I would consider LASIK. I'm a little squeamish about the entire process. I know that for a while it was like with a blade, and then now there's no blade LASIK or whatever. But I'm a little, Pat looks horrified right now.
The blade thing I just couldn't do.
Yeah, there's a blade involved.
The laser's fine.
Or there was. And I'm a little bit squeamish about it, but I think I could do it because friends have said they've had it done and then they just go home. They have, like some kind of a mask covering their eyes. You go home, you take a 2-hour nap, you wake up and you've got 20/20 vision.
Or 2015 vision,
or 2015
which is even better.
Vision. Yeah, I've heard in some cases as well. So yeah, it's not, it's more just that I don't know. I think I'm waiting for the technology to improve, and I'm waiting to see if if next time I go to the eye doctor, I'm not at a 3.0, then maybe I would ask about LASIK.
Yeah, I have pretty bad eyesight myself, but I don't treat it in any way. I don't have glasses, and I don't wear contacts. And it's interesting how I don't really want to get contacts because I'm squeamish about how the whole process would go. I'm sure I would get used to it. Yeah. But it's interesting that I'm too squeamish for contacts, and yet I'm willing to do LASIK because I would do this.
I thought when I had asked you about your vision, you said that you were fine, that you had perfect vision or something.
No, you also had me test reading something from across the room.
Oh yeah, you couldn't
and you were
see a
able
damn thing.
to do it just fine, and I couldn't see anything.
Yeah. Oh no, it was obviously I didn't believe you that you had perfect vision, but I thought you believed it.
No.
Oh, you don't believe it either. Okay.
On my driving lesson, my driving test that you have to take every 5 years.
Yeah.
I just guessed on the bottom line, and I miraculously passed. I have no idea how.
Oh, you're a danger to society.
I am.
Yeah. No, I didn't realize it was that bad. You should really go and get glasses or something. Yeah, I think the audience would enjoy it. You can get some Warby Parker glasses.
Starting tomorrow. I'll be on the show.
People would like that. Yeah. Okay, but yes, someday I will inquire about LASIK eye surgery. Peter wrote in, what's the worst thing you've eaten out of politeness? Okay, I feel kind of bad about telling this story because it relates to one of my great aunts. I'm not going to say exactly what her age is because that would identify which one of them it is. They don't speak English, but somebody might tell them. I have a great aunt who's, in her late 80s to mid 90s. Let me just put it that way. And about 12 or 14 years ago, we were a bunch of us in Argentina going over to her house. Have you heard, Pat, of gefilte fish?
Haven't.
Okay. Gefilte fish is not what she made. Gefilte fish is a sort of gelatinous loaf that is considered a staple at most Passover Seders and other events of the Jewish persuasion. And I never particularly disliked gefilte fish. More recently, I've not really liked the texture. I didn't really dislike gefilte fish. My great aunt one of my great aunts once made something that was similar to gefilte fish in that it was a cold fish-based loaf, but it had a very strange sauce on top of it. Imagine a meatloaf, but instead it's a gefilte fish loaf. Okay? Huge. Takes up, big pan. And then on top of it, it has a sauce that I couldn't describe specifically, but it seemed to be sort of a mix between mayonnaise and ketchup, which I think has a name. It might be
like tartar sauce? Is that what that is?
No, tartar sauce is relish in mayonnaise.
Okay.
The vegan explaining to me what tartar sauce is. And it really wasn't good. It really wasn't good. And I did eat some of it, but I think one of her kids was at this dinner and sort of politely suggested, why don't we throw some ravioli on the water as well? And I think that an alternative dish was created. And out of politeness, I did eat it. And it really was not good. It was terrible. And there's also an infamous incident involving my dad. And we refer to it as the Sloppy Joe incident. And the Sloppy Joe incident is we were relatively new to the U.S. Being vegan, Pat, do you know what Sloppy Joes are?
I know what Sloppy Joes are, yes.
Okay, I'm not even sure I know. And certainly when my dad made them, it didn't clarify. Let me put it that way. But my dad decided, hey, we're in the U.S. He had apparently heard about Sloppy Joes somewhere, and he decided we were making Sloppy Joes. And it was basically like a ground beef and tomato sauce mixture spooned onto hamburger buns. And it was absolutely terrible. And he recognizes that it's bad, and to this day still jokes that he might be making Sloppy Joe. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to be around. I'll stop by for dinner. And he's like, oh, good, we're having Sloppy Joes.
I never really was much of a picky eater before this whole new dietary constraint that I've taken on.
Right.
So I would eat just about anything. But I remember even just a year ago, I had to go to this social gathering where everyone was having Bloody Marys.
Okay.
I found it to be completely disgusting.
Oh, I
it's
don't
like
Bloody
vodka
Marys,
and like tomato juice and some weird spices and stuff.
Oh, God.
And I just
Spices.
I downed the whole thing because you don't want to waste alcohol, right? But
Okay.
I still just drank the whole thing as quickly as I could, and then I'm never gonna have one again.
Huh. I'm finding this story odd.
Yeah. I've also had haggis, which is like
Really?
sheep heart and
Didn't
liver
that,
and lungs and
is
stuff.
that what turned you vegan?
It probably should have.
I've heard that haggis is horrible. Like
Yeah.
truly horrible. And I've got a bunch of friends that have visited Scotland in the last couple of years, and they all say it's absolutely terrible.
I was like, I went to Scotland. I have to have the haggis, right? It's just like a story.
Is
Like a
that where you
battle
had
scar.
it?
Yes.
Oh, you had it in Scotland, huh? Okay, yeah. And then once, well, my mom actually does listen to the show sometimes, so I'm not going to tell the raw chicken story.
We'll cut that out.
We'll cut, yeah. Delete all mentions of that from the version of this that you eventually publish. Okay, Guillaume wrote in. Guillaume, of course, French for William, in case you didn't know. Guillaume wrote in saying, "What bad advice sounds good?" I have a few different cliche advice phrases that I think sometimes sound good and really aren't good advice. And this might be controversial, but always be yourself. You know when people say, don't worry about it, just be yourself. In certain situations, it's not really to your advantage to be yourself. Like, yeah, if you're in a relationship, if you're pursuing a relationship with someone, it's not great advice to pretend to be someone completely different than who you are. Because if the relationship is going to have long-term prospects, at some point you might have to reveal sort of like the real you. But sometimes always be yourself is used even for job interviews. Very often the people you'll be working with aren't the people who will be interviewing you in like a large company. You don't have to be exactly yourself and reveal every insecurity and flaw because you're trying to get a job, right? Help yourself to help yourself, so to speak. There's so many situations where the entire, don't worry, just be yourself. It's actually not the best advice.
Well, it's also just that people are complex. There are many different versions of you. How you act in a job interview is different than how you're going to act with a significant other
That's
or
true.
with your parents.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as if there's just one concrete version of you. I mean, that's just how people are.
Another one is this entire justifying actions by saying you only live once.
YOLO.
Right. Because, yeah, it's true. Like, okay, well, you know, I've got a travel budget. And in order to go where I want to go, I've got to go 5% beyond that travel budget. Hey, you only live once, do it. Okay, well, maybe that's justifiable, right? Going over your travel budget by 5%. Listen, I've really wanted to, I don't know, what's another example? Justifying doing something that really doesn't make sense because it's extremely risky or could lead to financial ruin because you, quote, only live once.
Yeah.
You can't apply that to all situations.
It's almost the same thing as live every day like it's your last. If
Yeah.
I lived every day like it was my last, I would be broke. I would be doing a lot of risky behaviors,
Right.
and it just would not be good. I couldn't do that every day.
What about don't take no for an answer? First of all, when it comes to sexual activity, there's many people who would have benefited from taking no for an answer. Many of those people are in jail right now or prison. But even more broadly, like sometimes it actually does make sense to cut your losses, take no for an answer, and to move on. I think most of those types of advice, it's like sometimes they make sense for particular situations, but applying any of those uniformly to your life, you're probably going to have a pretty bad time, don't you think?
Yeah. How about honesty is the best policy?
Sometimes it's not.
A lot of the times it's just not. I mean, sometimes it's actually more beneficial to lie or at
Yeah.
least to just not volunteer information if you can.
I've talked about the so-called white lie, and when you're lying to protect someone's feelings in a way that is not really going to hurt their life. Like if someone says, hey, I want you to listen to my guitar solo, and if you like it, I'm going to go and spend $5,000 on a guitar. That might be a time where you don't say, it was incredible, because you don't want the person to go and spend $5,000 on a guitar thinking that they're the next Jimmy Page because of what you told them they were able to do with the guitar. But at the same time, if there's really no downside to it, you don't always have to say everything that comes to mind. And I think I agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
I mean, what situations are you thinking of?
Well, when I was a freshman in college, I lived on a building with my roommate that was about 10 stories high.
Yeah.
And we were on the 10th story. And because we didn't have a lot to do, we would sometimes flick bottle caps out of the window.
Sure.
Now, aside from the fact that I was littering plastic, you know, maybe that's a new scandal. We can just leave that aside.
Yeah.
One time, my roommate decided to do it while I just wasn't there. I was away for the weekend.
Sure, yeah, let's go
And
with that.
the police found out about this incident and started going around every single room at the highest floors and asking if they were responsible for throwing the bottle caps out the window. Now, if he just said, no, it wasn't me, I don't know what you're talking about, he would have been fine. But instead, he volunteered the information thinking honesty was the best policy, and it
Yeah.
got him in quite a bit of trouble.
I don't know that that's the best example to defend honesty not being the best policy.
Why?
Well, I don't know. I mean, he was
dishonest and just lied about the whole thing and said that it wasn't him,
yeah,
he would have gotten away with it.
That's true, yeah. All right, well, I don't know what exactly. I think I would have not thrown the bottle caps to begin with.
Yeah. I just wanted an excuse to tell that story.
Okay, well, you found one. Okay, well, yeah, those are the ones that come to mind to me. Send me yours if you have ideas. Maybe we'll do a follow-up of member advice that sounds good but is actually bad on the bonus show, which is next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.